In 1402, the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I was the most powerful ruler in the Islamic world. He'd conquered the Balkans, defeated Christian crusaders at Nicopolis, was besieging Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire was weeks from collapse. Europe was terrified. The Ottoman juggernaut seemed unstoppable. Then a message arrived from the east, from a conqueror Bayezid had never heard of. A man who called himself the Sword of Islam and claimed dominion over all Muslim lands. The message was simple: withdraw from Anatolia or face destruction. Bayezid laughed, sent back an arrogant reply, called this eastern warlord a cripple, a nobody. 3 months later, Bayezid's entire army was annihilated. He was captured, locked in a cage, paraded across Asia as a broken trophy. And the man who destroyed him, Timur the Lame, continued his campaign of conquest that would kill 17 million people and build pyramids of human skulls, so high they could be seen for miles. If you're fascinated by the conquerors who make history's most brutal rulers look merciful, subscribe to Disturbed Historian. We're exploring the men who made genocide an art form. Timur was born in 1336 in what's now Uzbekistan. His name means iron in Turkic. He was from a minor noble family, not royalty. Not wealthy, just a small clan leader's son in the Chagatai Khanate, one of the fractured pieces of Genghis Khan's collapsed empire. As a young man, Timur was a sheep thief, a bandit. He was injured during a raid. Accounts vary on exactly how, and left with a permanently damaged right leg and a withered right hand. He walked with a severe limp for the rest of his life. His enemies called him Timur the Lame. Europeans corrupted this to Tamerlane. He hated the nickname, but he used the disability, turned it into part of his mythology, the crippled conqueror, the man who couldn't walk properly but could make empires kneel. By his 20s, Timur had gathered followers, mercenaries, displaced warriors, bandits like himself. He fought in the constant civil wars that plagued the fragmented Mongol successor states, built a reputation for cunning and absolute ruthlessness. And by 1370, he'd seized control of the Chagatai Khanate through a combination of military victories, political marriages, and systematic elimination of rivals. He never claimed the title of Khan. Technically, he ruled through puppet Khans from Genghis's bloodline. But everyone knew Timur held real power. He was the warlord who commanded armies, who made decisions, who would spend the next 35 years conquering everything between Turkey and India. Timur's military campaigns weren't about building an empire in the traditional sense. He wasn't interested in administration or governance. He wanted conquest, submission, wealth, and most importantly, he wanted to be remembered. He understood that fear is a weapon, that if you make one city's destruction so horrific that everyone hears about it, other cities surrender without fighting. So Timur pioneered psychological warfare through mass murder. He didn't just defeat enemies, he annihilated them, wiped cities from the map, killed populations so thoroughly that some cities never recovered. His method was consistent. When a city surrendered immediately, he'd take tribute and leave. Maybe execute a few leaders to make a point. But if a city resisted, if it made him fight, he'd destroy it completely. Everyone died, men, women, children, elderly, soldiers, and civilians. No distinction, no mercy. Then he'd build monuments from their remains. Pyramids of severed heads, towers made entirely of human skulls cemented together. These monuments could be 20 meters high, contained thousands of skulls, and they served a purpose. The next city heard about the pyramid and surrendered immediately. The numbers are staggering. Timur's campaigns killed an estimated 17 million people. In a world with far smaller population, this was roughly 5% of the global population. Genocidal scale. His army destroyed cities completely. Isfahan in Persia resisted. Timur killed every resident, all 70,000. Built 28 towers from their skulls. Delhi in India was sacked. Over 100,000 residents massacred in a single day. Baghdad was destroyed so thoroughly it lost regional importance for centuries. Aleppo, Damascus, countless other cities, all faced similar fates if they resisted. But Timur wasn't just mindless violence. He was strategic. He understood his enemies. In India, he justified his massacres on religious grounds, claimed he was fighting Hindu infidels. This gained him support from Muslim communities who saw him as a holy warrior. In Persia and the Middle East, he claimed to be restoring Mongol glory, reuniting the lands Genghis Khan had conquered. This appealed to nomadic warriors nostalgic for the empire. In every region, he adapted his propaganda, made himself the hero the locals wanted, while simultaneously massacring anyone who opposed him. His treatment of captured cities was calculated to maximize terror. Before destroying a city, he'd order his soldiers to bring every resident to a central square. Then he'd have them separated. Artisans, craftsmen, engineers, anyone with useful skills was spared and enslaved, sent back to Timur's capital Samarkand to build monuments and infrastructure. Beautiful people, both men and women, were taken as slaves or gifts. Everyone else was killed, systematically, with his army watching. This served multiple purposes. Eliminated resistance, provided slaves, and created witnesses who'd spread stories of Timur's cruelty. His soldiers became experts at mass killing. They developed efficient methods, beheading for soldiers who'd resisted, burning alive for those who'd fled, trampling under horses for cowards, being buried alive for leaders. Timur wanted variety in executions, wanted people to fear dying in multiple specific ways. The psychological impact was devastating. Cities that heard stories of Timur's approach would often expel their own leaders and send delegations begging for mercy before his army even arrived. In 1398, Timur invaded India. His stated reason was that the Delhi Sultanate was too lenient with Hindus, that Muslim rulers should not tolerate infidels. His real reason was Delhi's wealth. India was rich, Delhi controlled trade routes, and Timur needed money to fund his wars. The campaign was brutal even by his standards. His army crossed the Hindu Kush mountains in winter, lost thousands to cold and starvation. When they reached India, they were angry, hungry, motivated by promises of loot. Delhi's Sultan tried to stop them, failed. His army was routed. Timur's forces entered Delhi and began a massacre that lasted 3 days. The number killed is disputed. Conservative estimates say 100,000. Some sources claim higher. What's certain is that the city was devastated. Entire neighborhoods were burned. Markets were looted. Mosques and palaces were stripped of everything valuable. And then Timur ordered something that shocked even his own commanders. Kill every Hindu in the city. His soldiers complied, went house to house, killed entire families. The Yamuna River was reportedly clogged with bodies. When Timur finally left Delhi, the city was a smoking ruin. It took over a century for Delhi to recover its population. Timur loaded thousands of elephants with treasure, gold, jewels captured, craftsmen. Everything valuable was taken back to Samarkand. He'd spend the plunder building his capital into the most beautiful city in Central Asia. Palaces, mosques, gardens, all built by slaves, all funded by mass murder. Samarkand became a monument to Timur's conquests, proof that genocide could be profitable. But Timur's most famous victory was against the Ottoman Empire. By 1400, Sultan Bayezid I had conquered most of Anatolia. The Ottomans were expanding rapidly, threatening Timur's western territories, and Bayezid was arrogant, called himself the Sultan of Rum. The Sultan of Rome claimed authority over all Muslim lands. This couldn't coexist with Timur's ambitions. Both men claimed to be the greatest Muslim conqueror. Both wanted dominance. War was inevitable. Timur sent diplomatic messages, demanded Bayezid withdraw from territories Timur considered his. Bayezid refused, sent insulting replies, called Timur a cripple, mocked his age. Big mistake. Timur was 66 but still commanded massive armies. And he didn't forgive insults. He marched west with a force, estimated between 100 and 200,000 soldiers. Bayezid assembled a similarly sized army. The two forces met at Ankara in July 1402. The battle was catastrophic for the Ottomans. Timur had spent months preparing. He'd poisoned wells along Bayezid's supply routes. bribed some of Bayezid's vassals to switch sides, positioned his forces on higher ground. When the battle started, Bayezid's allies defected mid-fight. His army disintegrated. Ottoman soldiers who'd been fighting for hours in summer, heat without water, broke and ran. Timur's cavalry pursued them, cut them down by thousands. By the end of the day, the Ottoman army was destroyed, and Bayezid was captured trying to flee. What happened to Bayezid depends on which source you believe. All agree he was captured and died in Timur's custody within a year. But the details differ. Some sources say Timur treated him with respect, kept him in luxurious captivity, that Bayezid died naturally from depression and shame. Others say Bayezid was locked in an iron cage, paraded around as Timur traveled, fed through the bars like an animal, forced to watch as Timur gave orders using Bayezid's wives as footstools. These stories might be exaggerated, propaganda created by Timur's enemies or Bayezid's supporters, but they persisted. The image of the mighty Ottoman Sultan reduced to a caged animal became legendary. What's certain is that Bayezid's defeat saved Constantinople. The Ottomans had been besieging the city, were close to breaking through. Then news came that their sultan was defeated and captured. The siege collapsed. Ottoman forces retreated. The empire descended into civil war as Bayezid's sons fought for succession. Constantinople got a 50-year reprieve. The Byzantine Empire, which would have fallen in 1402, survived until 1453, all because Timur destroyed the Ottoman army in a single afternoon. After defeating Bayezid, Timur continued conquering. He invaded Syria, destroyed Aleppo, sacked Damascus, massacred their populations, built more skull towers. By 1404, he controlled territory stretching from Turkey to India. From Russia to the Persian Gulf, he was planning an invasion of China, had assembled an army of 200,000, was preparing to march east and conquer the Ming dynasty. Then in February 1405, while camping near the Chinese border, he fell ill. Died within weeks. He was 68, had spent his entire adult life conquering, and died before completing his final campaign. Timur was buried in Samarkand in an elaborate tomb, the Guri Amir Mausoleum. Beautiful turquoise domes, intricate tilework. Inside, a jade tombstone marked his grave, and inscribed on that tombstone was a warning. Whoever disturbs my tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I. For over 500 years, nobody touched it. The tomb was respected, feared. Local legends said opening it would bring disaster, that Timur's curse was real. In June 1941, Soviet archaeologists received permission to excavate the tomb. Soviet leadership wanted to study Timur's remains, understand the historical figure. Local elders protested, warned that opening the tomb would bring war. The archaeologists dismissed this as superstition. They opened the tomb on June 19, 1941, removed Timur's skull to study it. The skull confirmed he'd had a damaged leg, just as the historical accounts described. 2 days later, on June 21st, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, the largest military invasion in history. 27 million Soviets would die in the war that followed. The timing is probably coincidence. Hitler had been planning the invasion for months. The date wasn't determined by some archaeologist opening a tomb in Uzbekistan. But the legend persists. Timur's warning seemed to have come true. An invader more terrible than himself had been unleashed. The Soviets reburied Timur with full Islamic honors in 1942 after Stalingrad. After the tide had turned, as if respecting the dead could change the war's outcome. It couldn't, but the story became part of Timur's legend. That even dead for 5 centuries, his curse could shape history. Timur's legacy is complicated. In Uzbekistan, he's a national hero. Statues of him stand in every major city. He's celebrated as the founder of the Timurid dynasty, the man who made Samarkand great, the conqueror who united Central Asia. His brutality is downplayed. His massacres are framed as necessary for building empire. The skull towers are forgotten or rationalized as psychological warfare, as if that makes them acceptable. He's presented as a great leader, a source of national pride. Elsewhere, he's remembered as one of history's worst mass murderers. 17 million dead, cities destroyed, cultures erased, populations eliminated. He was Genghis Khan's successor in cruelty. But unlike Genghis, whose empire lasted, Timur's empire fractured immediately after his death. His descendants fought each other. The empire he'd built through violence collapsed within decades. The Timurid dynasty produced some notable figures, including Babur, who founded the Mughal Empire in India. But Timur's conquest-based empire couldn't survive. Without his personal terror holding it together, Samarkand, his capital, survived. The monuments he'd built remained. They're UNESCO World Heritage Sites now. Tourists visit, photograph the beautiful architecture, the intricate tilework, the massive domes. They're stunning. Built by enslaved craftsmen brought from conquered cities, funded by looted treasure. Every beautiful building in Samarkand represents cities destroyed and populations massacred. The beauty is inseparable from the brutality that created it. Timur fought his entire adult life. From his 20s to his death at 68, he was almost constantly on campaign, conquering, destroying, building skull towers, collecting tribute. He never stopped, never settled into being a peacetime ruler, never focused on governance or administration. He was a warlord, a conqueror. That's all he wanted to be, and he was extraordinarily successful at it. Built an empire through pure military force, made himself one of the most feared men in history, then died and watched his empire immediately fall apart. There's something almost meaningless about his conquests in retrospect. He killed 17 million people, conquered territories from Turkey to India, built the largest land empire since the Mongols, and within a generation it was gone, fragmented, absorbed by other powers. The cities he destroyed were rebuilt. The populations he massacred were replaced. The skull towers he built as eternal. Monuments to his power crumbled and disappeared. What remains? Some buildings in Samarkand, his tomb, and a reputation as one of history's worst mass murderers. But in his time, he was unstoppable. He defeated every army he fought, destroyed every city that resisted, made sultans and emperors fear him. Even the mighty Ottomans, who would conquer Constantinople and terrify Europe, were crushed by Timur. Bayezid, the sultan who defeated crusaders and was besieging the last Byzantine city, was reduced to a prisoner, possibly caged, definitely humiliated. The Ottoman Empire collapsed into civil war, and all because Bayezid insulted a crippled old man who commanded 100,000 soldiers and had made genocide his signature. Timur's story is a reminder that disability doesn't limit ambition or capability. He was crippled, walked with a severe limp, had a withered hand, and he conquered more territory than most able-bodied rulers ever dreamed of. He used his disability, made it part of his legend, the limping conqueror, the man who couldn't walk straight, but made empires bend. That's darkly inspiring. Not his mass murders, but his refusal to let physical limitation define him. He let cruelty define him instead, chose to be remembered as the man who built skull towers, who caged sultans, who killed 17 million people. That was his choice, and he succeeded completely. Timur the Lame, Tamerlane, the Sword of Islam, the Lord of the Fortunate Conjunction, the Conqueror, the man who made Genghis Khan's descendants look restrained, who terrified the Ottomans, who saved Constantinople accidentally, who died planning to invade China, who was buried with a curse that seemingly came true 5 centuries later. History's forgotten monster, the conqueror whose empire died with him, but whose reputation for brutality survived. 17 million dead, hundreds of cities destroyed, skull towers that could be seen for miles, a caged sultan, a curse that might have predicted World War II, and a crippled boy from Uzbekistan who decided he'd rather be history's most feared conqueror than be limited by the leg. That couldn't hold him. He achieved that goal completely. Timur the Lame conquered everything within reach, killed everyone who resisted, built monuments from their bones, and died still wanting more, still planning the next campaign, still refusing to stop until age and disease finally ended what no army could. That's Timur, not a hero, not a builder, a destroyer, a conqueror, a mass murderer who made it policy, who systematized genocide, who turned psychological warfare into an art form, who proved that cruelty, properly applied, could make entire regions surrender without fighting, who showed that fear could be more powerful than armies, and who, 500 years after his death, might have cursed an entire world into its worst war. Or didn't, but people believe it anyway. Because Timur's reputation for being capable of anything, even from beyond the grave, was that thoroughly established. Timur the Lame, remember the name. Not the beautiful buildings, not the empire that collapsed, the 17 million corpses, the skull towers, the crippled conqueror who refused to be limited by anything, especially not by morality or mercy, or the basic human impulse to not build pyramids from the severed heads of children. He rejected all of that, chose conquest, chose brutality, chose to be remembered as the most feared man of his age, and succeeded completely. That's his legacy, that's Timur.